I'm the chair of the African American Studies Department. And on behalf of my department, I'd like to welcome you to our Frontiers in African American Studies Colloquium series. Many of you may not know, but this series is funded by a grant from Ford Foundation. And we have used the grant primarily to develop a new PhD program in African diaspora studies. And hopefully, if everything goes well, our first incoming students will be entering the university in 1976-1977 academic year. 1996. Sorry. I just had a birthday, so I'm going back 20 years. We've also used the grant to sort of develop a much more diasporic focus in our undergraduate curriculum, and much more interdisciplinary focus. So our department is moving along both quantitatively and qualitatively in terms of our intellectual, theoretical, analytical, and methodological frameworks. And within this context, we are sponsoring this, our first event of the spring semester. And I would like to ask former chair, Professor Margaret Wilkerson, to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you very much, Professor Henson, Chair Henson. Former chairs are happy to make those kinds of announcements. This is a real pleasure for me to introduce to you and present to you Dr. Lucia Birnbaum, because I met Lucia many years ago when I was directing the Women's Research Center on campus, and she was one of our very outstanding scholars and just a wonderful colleague. We really enjoyed having her at the center and having her on campus. She is a Berkeley resident, but I'm very pleased to welcome you back again to the Berkeley campus, Dr. Birnbaum. Lucia Birnbaum is a cultural historian whose book, Feminism in Italy, won an American Book Award from the Before Columbus Foundation. And today this book is adjudged the most important and authoritative text on Italian feminism, a work that has attained something like the status of a modern classic. Black Madonnas, from which she will be speaking today, has been acclaimed by scholars ranging from Harvey Cox of the Harvard Divinity School to feminist scholar Donna Haraway, art historians, sociologists, and a range of other scholars. It has been called a daring multi- and supra-disciplinary work, groundbreaking and inspiring analysis of submerged knowledges for contemporary democratic movements. She will also be presenting from her work in progress, Godmothers, which has been, or excerpts at least, have been presented to the conference of the American Italian Historical Association in November of last year. Cross-cultural and multidisciplinary in methodologies, Dr. Birnbaum holds a doctorate in European and U.S. history with special work in psychology, women's studies, Italian studies, literature, economics, and political science. She is interested in the subordinated peoples that Gramsci called the subaltern classes, a category extending beyond economic exploitation to negated cultures, a concern she has pursued to prehistory and the submerged cultures of women, ethnic outsiders, and others found in myths, stories, everyday rituals, lullabies, festivals, heresies, pilgrimages to Black Madonnas, and historic and contemporary movements for transformation. Since 1969, Italy has been the matrix of her studies because that country may be a laboratory for the third millennium. Historically, it is the crossroads of Europe, Africa, and Asia. And today, the Italian women's, nonviolence, and student movements identify with the third world and work for an unnamed and unprecedented multicultural democratic communism. Dr. Birnbaum's recent work confirms, first of all, the ultimately African and subsequent Asian genetic inheritance of European and European Americans trapped in the DNA by geneticists. Secondly, the persistence of the memory of a dark prehistoric woman, Divinity, with provenance from Africa and Asia. And finally, the significance of the history of negated cultures of the earth. I'm sure that you will join with me in enthusiastically welcoming Dr. Lucia Birnbaum.
I want to thank Margaret for reminding me. She really was very pivotal in my kind of renaissance as a scholar. It goes way back to 1985. I reached an impasse, as writers often do. I was writing this book, and I had reached, I just couldn't continue writing it. And she invited me and gave me some space at the Women's Center, and that was enough to get me unblocked, and I wrote the book, and I thank her now publicly. Anyway, I just wanted, before I forget, there are pieces of paper up here that I'm going to be referring to. Maybe Sandra, you can hand them out. These refer to my books and to my book being cut. Yeah.
This is so everyone should have one.
Yeah. Whatever. Oh, and also this. This is a bibliography. This is most important.
You got it? You want this?
Yeah, this is most important. The books I'm going to be referring to.
You can finish them.
I'm going to speak for a while, and then we're going to have slides, which I hope will give you a graphic notion of what I'm talking about, because some of this refers, you have to see it graphically. They're back and forth to those pages, whatever. In any event, for decades, I've been writing a trilogy. An experience, I already know it's going to be a trilogy, but it's an experience that turned into a journey of self-discovery. It began with Liberazione, which is a book about Italian feminism. And as happens often, you write a book and you have all kinds of questions that you haven't answered, and that means you write another book. And that's how I got into this book. And then, having written this book, I had questions I hadn't answered, and I got into the book I'm writing now, which is called Godmothers, Italian and Italian American Women and Other Peoples of Colors. Although Liberazione is considered a definitive study of one of the strongest women's movements in the world, I was left with a nagging feeling after I wrote it that I hadn't really explained the self-assurance of these present women who stood in front of Parliament in 1977, and they put their hands on their hips. This is when the bill was being, for legal abortion was being fought in the Parliament. They put their hands on their hips and they said, "It is my uterus and I shall manage it." And I thought, that's a kind of a knowledge that they have that's grounded not only in the body but in the earth. And I felt, as a historian trained to work with written documents, that I had to get beyond written documents to understand this. So I became something of an archaeologist and an anthropologist. First of all, by 1987, I had become interested in Maria Gimbutas' work, archaeological work, which is in that bibliographical piece of paper. And I was in Italy, and I began tracing around Italy, looking at there's a great deal of evidence of the pre-Christian woman divinity in Italy. And I came across this interesting business that every time I came across evidence of the pre-Christian woman divinity, I came across evidence, historical evidence, that these were places of heresy, religious heresy, and also places particularly in the late 19th and the late 20th century, of political radicalism for equality and justice. So I was struck with this kind of congruence. But as a matter of fact, the history of writing this book is curious. I thought I had to write a book on folklore of Italy. The book was entitled, as a matter of fact, Dark Wheat and Red Poppies. Had a great title, but I never quite wrote that book because I was stopped at one point by a very arresting experience watching the procession of a Black Madonna. And the idea, I'll tell you about that in the paper, the idea of, I became kind of overwhelmed by this idea of Black Madonna, and I wrote the next 18 months I wrote that book. In any event, I began, as I was walking around and looking at archaeological ruins, I began studying everyday rituals, including pilgrimages to Black Madonna. And it became a study of the submerged religious and political beliefs of subaltern classes of Italy. Now, my work in progress with godmothers has extended this. My interest in subaltern classes and negated cultures has been deepened by contemporary genetics research primarily. I encountered a fascinating scholar. I've been an affiliated scholar at the Stanford Women's Center, and an Italian geneticist whose name is Lucia Chiavola Birnbaum, who has just this year published a magnificent, tremendous tome. It's in the bibliography. It's called The History and Geography of Human Genes. His work was extremely catalytic for me because it documents in the DNA of our genes, the so-called white Europeans, and as well as all inhabitants of the earth, are peoples of colors whose genetic inheritance reflects primordial migrations from Africa and subsequent migrations from Asia. According to Chiavola, white Europeans in genetic inheritance are 65% Asian and 35% African. This datum, along with archaeological documentation that the oldest deity known to human beings was a woman, put my thinking into sharper focus. Images of Black Madonnas, which I had earlier considered a metaphor, that's the first paragraph of the book, a metaphor for a memory of the time the earth was believed to be a body of a woman, now may be considered a genetic memory of migrating ancestors from Africa 2 million years ago, and as Homo sapiens 100,000 and 60,000 years ago when they reached every continent. A memory that contemporary geneticists, who talk very interestingly these days, who say these memories may be encoded in our genes. Now, this genetics data also converges with a good deal of scholarship that has been done by Africanists. For example, Sheikh Anta Diop on the Grimaldi figures that can be found all over Europe and Asia. The whole subject becomes very complex, and it's probably very good for me because I've had to learn other fields. The subject is very complex because, as you see from the world map, Africa and Asia are extremely close together. And if we think about this from prehistory, it becomes very hard to see what the boundaries are between Africa and Asia. And clearly, for long, long periods of time, there's so much interchange, not only with Africa and Asia, but with that region, which only became a named region 30,000 years ago, which is Europe. Anyway, to refer specifically to Chiavola Birnbaum, there's an article in the 1993 Science, which I have on that piece of paper, which is beyond his big $150 tome, which is his latest unpublished findings, in which he says there were at least 2 major expansions of genus Homo. Between 1 million and 2 million years ago, Homo erectus started to spread from Africa to the entire Old World. Anatomically, modern Homo sapiens is believed to have begun this spread between 100,000 and 60,000 years ago, and to have continued moving until the present. He holds holds that the archaic Homo sapiens closest to modern Europe seem to have come from Africa. The view that humans originated in Africa appears to be uncontested among geneticists and paleoanthropologists. What apparently remains contested is that Homo sapiens originating in Africa may have developed differently in different regions. In this controversy, Chiavola Birnbaum holds that the evidence is so overwhelming for African origins and that the polycentric thesis doesn't have nearly as much evidence supporting it as the out of Africa thesis. Also because he considers peoples of Africa the most diverse of the earth, and African migrations have been spurred by developments in culture, biology, or both. Notably, African use of rafts and boats around 55,000 to 60,000 years ago to reach Australia. Migrations from West Africa to the east and the south were, according to Chiavola's works, are related to agricultural developments. Intriguing for my work is his theory that cultural traits evolve similarly to genes in evolution. He cites, for example, the Vikings and the Normans of Scandinavian inheritance who in the 10th and the 11th century were the scourge of Europe, invading like Sicily and then Great Britain. They were rapacious invaders. And now Scandinavians, he points out, have become world leaders in peace. So he thinks that it's cultural evolution as well as genetic evolution. He's a fascinating scholar. Anyway, all of this kind of scholarship has put my thinking about Black Madonnas into sharper focus. Because the images of Black Madonnas and other dark women divinities may be found everywhere that Africans early migrated and everywhere that Roman legions who were drawn from the subaltern classes of 3 continents later brought them. Now, I have some maps here that are very tackled because I've taken them all over the world. You notice the one of Italy, and the green dots, there's some green dots that are darker. It doesn't mean anything. I just ran out of the dark one. You'll notice the Black Madonnas of Italy are all over, in the north, the center, and the south. So it's not a matter of Black Madonnas belonging to that southern part of Italy, which is considered superstitious, Scopes, Hieronymus, and retarded. It's they're all over. In my view, Black Madonnas may be considered sisters to one another and sisters to the hundreds of other dark divinities of the world. My book on Black Madonna analyzes the evidence in Italy for the continuing presence of the dark woman divinity. Not only the archaeological evidence, but in myths, legends, stories, fables, festivals, rituals of everyday life, heresies, lullabies, epithets, and historic and contemporary politics characterized by nonviolence with themes of justice and transformation. There's a great deal of work in Italy because there's a kind of a socialist agenda, as a matter of fact, they're interested in where you can see submerged beliefs, and festivals are a very good place to look to see. Carnivals, for example, are very good for finding submerged beliefs. In fact, in the book I call it Carnival, a festival that can be regarded as the laughter of the goddess. Easter mysteries in Italy, which are acted out in the streets, can be regarded as vernacular theology, what people actually believe, and what they actually believe is very divergent from what canonical Catholicism is. First of all, it's all mother-centered, and it's a dark mother in the South, particularly. Anyway, in the book, I've analyzed the many meanings of Black Madonnas. The earliest one I know is Execundo. She's called Buonissima. I'm going to show you slides, which will show you that I can't do it and do the paper. But she's the earliest one that I found. She's 5th century, and her face is a wonderful face. She seems to have etched on her face all of the humiliation by the 5th century, what the church fathers had done to the early woman divinity. Because she'd been demoted from a multifaceted woman to the mother of Jesus, but she's not in the Trinity. Anyway, what I did in the book was look at what each of these Black Madonnas that I came across, and there are many more than those I came across, what their meaning was in the everyday life of the people around them, and what they called, for example, there's a whole belt of Black Madonnas from the Adriatic, from Naples to the Adriatic here. One here, outside of Avellino, is called La Schiavona, which means great black slave mother, which is fascinating if you think about why is she called great black slave mother. At the Loreto, here, which is the national shrine of Black Madonnas, she's, her meaning, you have to see what you do in a work like this, because you don't have any precedents, you don't have any documents, you have to keep your eyes open. What you do is look at the art in that church. There's a facade that encloses the Black Madonna and her son. And on this facade, there are 10 sibyls preceding 10 Judeo-Christian prophets, which is fascinating if you think of them. Just read the art. And that's this Sybil is on the cover of the book. This is Sybil from Libya. You find her on the floor of the Duomo in Siena. There's also a Black Madonna on the floor of that cathedral. When I asked the sacristan where she was, I think Dove si trova la Madonna Nera, he said to me in Italian, first of all, she's not black, she's sporca. And I thought, whoops, that's an Italian word that's very pejorative. It means dirty in the sense that we mean dirty, pornographically. And I thought, what I discovered when we were now asking questions about Black Madonnas was that the clergy, first of all, was minimally very uncomfortable with the idea. Second of all, they would tell me all kinds of stories about why she was black. She was black because there was a fire, or she wasn't really black. She was bruna. Bruna is a word that means dark brown. They would just tell me a whole bunch of stories, and so that you have to get beyond what they tell you. When you go to a place that you know there's a Black Madonna, and often you go into the church where she's supposed to be and you can't find her because the church has repainted her white. So I asked the women in the streets where she was, and they said, leave. They told me where to go. Even if she'd been painted white, you see, they considered her black. So it's not a matter of the coloring so much, because many of them have been painted lightened or painted white. As a matter of fact, the heavy readings, like one outside of Ragusa, she's been sculpted in ghastly white marble, which can't be changed in any event. But she's still considered a Black Madonna. In any event, this is a mother-centered liberation theology, remembering the age of the goddess, and whose implications are perhaps suggested in the Italian feminist phrase, a world without bosses and without wars. They're multicultural in their implications, and they can be considered a metaphor for the dynamic spiral of the prehistoric dark earth mother from Africa and later from Asia Minor. The congruence of Africa and Asia is suggested in the Black woman of the Song of Songs of Hebrew Scriptures. I'll show you a picture of her, Divinity, when she said it's from the Song of Songs, and underneath it is I am black and beautiful. She also connotes the subordinate role of women in the Abrahamic established religions, which are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, along with the subterranean stream of beliefs that hark back and persevere back to the earth mother. The marginal and persecuted experience of Jews and Muslims of Italy, the Franciscan strain of Catholicism, whose overtones of pantheism, remember the Christian woman of Divinity, the history of Waldensian Protestants, incidentally, in the north, over here. this is the major sanctuary in northern Italy for Black Madonnas. This was a place where the Waldensians, who were heretics before the Protestant Reformation, they were heretics because they built sanctuaries for the poor and women preached. There's a lot of burning there. I mean, there are lots of meanings to Black Madonnas, but the thing that kept recurring for me was the liberation theology, in which base groups of Italy say we are the church, and they consider themselves Catholic, but they don't consider that whatever is Catholicism is handed down by the Pope. It's Aldo Moro's belief. Aldo Moro was the martyred Christian Democratic leader in the 70s who said that Catholicism and communism are converging parallels. It's a Black Madonna in his town of Bowery. In any event, it's base movements of Italy who identify with the dark and the poor of the south of the globe. Now, there's a kind of convergence of scholarship today. Genetics and archaeology, the Human Genome Project of Coloni Sforza, who verifies the dates of early migrations, the archaeological findings of Maria Gimbutas. Incidentally, what is happening is that they verify one another. Coloni Sforza verifies Gimbutas' theory of the Kurgan invasion from the Russian steppes of the expansion of Kurgans who overcame the peaceful and egalitarian civilization of the woman divinity and initiated the Indo-European or Aryan epoch of 33,000 years of war, slavery, inequality, and violence. This is a complex story which Coloni Sforza links to an earlier agricultural expansion. But in effect, genetics has corroborated this controversial theory of Gimbutas. Believing that this kind of a study needs specific information in specific time and place. In Godmothers, I have, among other aspects of that book, I've studied the ancestries, in my own ancestry, in the history of the birthplaces of my Sicilian grandparents, and I have found evidence of 1, African origin, 2, African Asian goddesses, and a cultural inheritance of dominant patriarchy and submerged matristic beliefs. These, as I suggested in Black Madonnas, can be found in many places, but primarily folklore and celebratory politics. Near the ancestral Sicilian site of my paternal grandparents, there's a reconstructed skeleton that's been identified as African that was found close to the statues of the goddess of Magaba Iblea and the goddess of Guamukele. I'll show you those when I show you the slides. The goddess as a mother suckling 2 infants, and a goddess with almond eyes and hair that appears to be an African cornrows who smiles enigmatically. These figures have been described by anthropologists. This figure is of the black race and can be seen, all of these figures can be seen in the Museo Archeologico in Syracuse, which incidentally is one of the best museums in the world, and I really recommend it to you. So looking at my own ancestry, my ancestors appear to be African and subsequently Asian in origin. In my case, African origin was succeeded by Sikani. Sikani are the Ur inhabitants of Sicily, who originally came from Africa, migrated to Asia, then to Spain, and then to Liguria, and came down the Italian peninsula into Sicily in the Neolithic era. The next wave were the Phoenicians, who were Canaanite Jews from Asia Minor, who after defeat by the Israelites in 1100 BCE founded a base in Carthage, Africa, and carried Astarte and goddesses of Africa and Asia wherever they sailed. And they sailed all over, from Spain to Britain to Sardinia to Sicily. And they settled in my father's ancestral hometown, so I'm fascinated by them. Now, the Indo-European Aryan strain of my inheritance begins with the single line, who descended the Italian peninsula about 1000 BCE, followed by the Greeks, who were also Indo-European, who colonized Magna Graecia after 750 BC, and by Indo-European Romans, who conquered South Italy after 350 BCE. But African and Semitic threads from Asia Minor continue to be woven. The African descendants of Phoenicians who fought Greeks and Romans in Punic Wars, Jews in diaspora after year 70 CE, making Italy the oldest Jewish community in Europe. More Indo-European Aryan threads are woven with Germanic tribes in the early Common Era, along with continuing influences from Asia Minor, Byzantines after 330 CE, and Arab Muslims after 700 CE. After 1060, when Normans took Sicily 6 years before they took Great Britain, invasions continued from the north. This is a roll call which contemporary Sicilian peasants will give you, and in which they include the Pope, Lombards, German, Swabians, French, Angevins, Spanish, Aragonese, Spanish and Austrian, Bourbons, and Northern Italians. Like Sicilian, all these invaders of Northern Europe were ultimately of African and Asian inheritance, but in this case crossed by Celtic and other strains, and becoming, like all Europeans and everybody else, complex genetic and cultural mixtures. This is the point I want to leave with you, because all these Sforza emphasizes. He emphasizes African origins, but he points out that all human beings, and in this case, talking about Northern Europeans and Southern Europeans, all peoples are bewildering, floating sets and subsets of genes that change in relatively short periods of evolutionary time, which means that the concept of race gets very, very odd. Yes. The concept of ethnicity becomes odder. But the importance of knowing our history is underlined. My research into my Sicilian antecedents converges with the DMA documentation of migration from Africa and Asia, converges with scholarship of African and African American researchers who have pointed to the centrality of African human civilization, converges with Martin Bernal, in particular, a controversial scholar who has deconstructed the Greek civilization, documenting African and Levantine influence on the high civilization of the Greeks. Feminist scholars. This converges also with feminist scholarship, which points out the Greek civilization is not necessarily an exemplar of all of everything we should admire anyway, because they were violent. They demoted women for their high status. In any event, the whole thing, there's a kind of convergence that's happening in scholarship. It's extremely exciting. The Phoenicians, who worshipped the goddess Astarte, who brought to Sicily from the Levant, near base in Africa, also brought African goddesses, notably Isis and Hathor. They brought, from the Middle East, they brought Inanna, Cybele, and Diana, and they brought Demeter and Persephone from Greece, from Crete particularly. In my case, I'm fascinated by this because Phoenicians are particularly evident in Sicily, in the area of my paternal grandparents, around Palermo, Erice, and Trapani, in the area of my maternal antecedents, which is southeastern Ragusa, Modica, and Camarina. The story of how these early goddess civilizations influenced Christianity is particularly evident when you get into this history. Isis holding Horus. In any event, that the figures of a young, Kouros, a young son, is found in Phoenician statues of the youth at Motia, offshore Trapani, Megara, Iberia. Well, I have to hurry. One reviewer of my book said that not only did it substantiate in the cultural history of Italy that there was a civilization of goddess that was emerging at the end of the second millennium, but that in the case of Italy, she never left. The presence of the dark goddess is felt not only in veneration of Black Madonnas, but in songs, stories, lullabies, vernacular art, folk celebration, and political actions of subaltern classes. I've tracked this in the godmothers to 3 places in Sicily where there's a lot of evidence. One is Megara Iblea, whose ties to Syria and Asia Minor were very close. That's here. Paterno, where there was a sanctuary with soothsayers and dream interpreters. And my father's birthplace, which was called Ibla Irea, and is present-day Ragusa, where she was called Ibla Nera, or Black Ibla. And it's fascinating to me all the circumlocutions that scholars go to say that this is a mistake. They say that Nana is a mistake for Hera, the Greek goddess who was a jealous wife of Zeus, maybe. To me, it seems plausible that Ibla was called Black and a genetic and cultural memory of early African migrations, or because nearby African migrations, goddesses brought to Sicily were Black. Specifically, she may refer to the Egyptian goddess Isis, who more broadly disregarded as Black, as does contemporary Senegalese historian Cheikh Anta Diop. In any event, the memory of Isis is presented as persisted to this day, as I indicated in this book, in the folklore carnival. Anyway, the story of Africa and Asia is melded in the story of the Phoenicians, who then became so threatening to the Greeks and the Romans they declared war on them, spread salt on Carthage so we never have life again. But those people call themselves Canaanites to this day. Anyway, there's a mixture. Astarte, the Asiatic Phoenician goddess, merged with the African Egyptian goddesses Hathor and Isis, who were depicted with horns embracing a circle or a sun. Egyptian goddesses shared symbols with goddesses of Sicily, particularly the pubic triangle, snakes, the circle bounded by a snake, and snake says horns embracing a circle. In subsequent ages of the Sicels, Greeks, Romans, and Christians, but patristic and matristic threads were interwoven. But my research has indicated that matristic beliefs persisted in dominant patriarchal civilization. I'll give you an instance of this that I have in my book on godmothers. Carnival, for example, in the Contea di Modica, which is this area of southeastern Sicily, where my paternal ancestors. Before the Counter-Reformation, which is the 16th to the 18th centuries, there was a particular ritual called the Day of the Comari. Comari is the Italian term for godmothers. These were women who remembered the nurturance of the goddess and who bonded together under the church covering of Maria. That's where the term comes from, Maria. Now, in this carnival ritual, women would bring a particular minestrone to people who were angry with one another. It was kind of a peaceful kind of ritual. This Day of the Comari was a carnival ritual until the 16th century, when the Inquisition identified women in the festival of Comari with the devil. Whereupon, you see how the resistance of vernacular beliefs emerges. Whereupon peasants changed the meaning of the devil from the malevolent figure of the Christian canon to vernacular belief that the devil was crippled and benign. It's fascinating. They just changed the meaning of the devil. This is resistance to dominant Christian beliefs. And you can see this all through the folklore, and I've tracked it to the 19th century. You can track it, for example, in vendor cries. Vendor cries are very revealing. You may even have heard some. My grandfather when he first came to this country, did a market cry which the vendors sing what is being sold today that's good. But the cries are full of submerged beliefs. For example, in the late 19th century, in Sicily, just before they came to the United States, vendor cries would praise the fruit of the earth and tell the story of what had happened to the prehistoric Earth Mother. In the Song of Grape Vendors, for example, grapes were called Madre Maltratada, or the mistreated mother, perhaps referring to the abuse of the Earth Mother in the Greco-Roman Christian epoch. Suggesting peasant theology, vendors sang, if grapes are white, they connote misfortune. If they're black, they mean joy, suggesting that the true mother is black and brings joy. The white mother of the church means misfortune. This kind of belief, incidentally, you can find over and over again in many, many stories in Sicilian folklore. And these folk rituals continue to teach the ethic of the spiral of the Earth Mother from life to death to regeneration. You see it in the rituals. For example, a Christmas ritual, which in Italy is not called Christmas, is called Natale, which means the birthing, because the mother is central. In which old women at Christmas time sold bunches of dried flowers, connoting the spiral of life from birth to maturity to death and regeneration. Well, women, early subordinated by the church, became objects of violence under the Inquisition, which is 15th to the 18th century, when women were burned as witches and heretics or beaten and humiliated. A raped woman, for example, would be put on a donkey by minions of the Inquisition, stripped to the waist, naked, paraded through the streets, and lashed until she fainted in front of the local castle. That evening, Catholic clergy and barons would have a feast in celebration of the church vindicated on the beaten body of the violated woman. Women's resistance to these atrocities can be found in the folklore. In carnivals of Italy in this period, Inquisition period, women would sit in a circle and mend socks while they denounced injustice, insulted the powers that be, made fun of men's sexual prowess, sent barbs at conventionally chaste matrons, and talked about the sexual activities of priests. In a carnival rite at Modica, a dark old woman with a long black veil would run about, furiously knitting a black wool garment. She was called La Vecchia della Fusa, the old woman who purred like a cat, remembering perhaps the cat who was the familiar of Isis past. Though this old woman in black, according to popular belief, knew the whereabouts of enchanted treasure. Poetic license during Carnival enabled poets, and these are words I got from a 19th century collection, to tell the thing as it clearly is and without subterfuge. This is interesting to me that this phrase, and you find this often, the kind of phrase that comes up in a celebratory situation comes out of the unconscious. And this is a phrase, incidentally, for those of you who remember the 60s, that was familiar in the 60s and to tell the thing as it really is. But this was 19th century. And in this collection, they were talking about one unnamed Sicilian poet of the 16th century who told the thing as it clearly is, was described as fiercely mordant, a rare honesty, acute intelligence, small intact stature, with a bald head, mobile features, luminous eyes, and black as an Ethiopian. Well, I've done what I'm doing in my contemporary, this recent book is unpacking what the cultural meanings, for example, of my own names, which are Lucia and Teresa, and finding a great deal of very interesting information, which Lucia was clearly a co-optation of the Earth Mother. And Teresa was from a Jewish conversa family who did this remarkable thing. And there will be an enormous irony in her story because in 1970 the Pope named her the first woman doctor of the church. The importance of Teresa, she was a Jewish conversa family who were forced by the Inquisition under torture to renounce their faith. And what she did was that Teresa's importance in Catholic doctrine is that she insisted on mental prayer, which took away beliefs from the scrutiny of the church. And if you look very closely at her beliefs, they go clear back before Judaism to the pre-Christian woman divinity, many of them. It's a fascinating, you sort of unpack, it becomes a fascinating story. Well, I want to give you some notion of the kind of research I'm doing, and we're going to talk about it. my concern to recover the whole human story, not just the recent story that began 5,000 years ago. Because if we look at the whole story, we're impressed by how peaceful our early African and Asian forebears were. Cavalli starts us studying the pygmies of Central Africa, whom he considers closest to our Paleolithic ancestors, calls them the most peaceful population group he's ever encountered. This punctures the conventional wisdom that people have always been violent, and inequality has been the nature of history. We know now that civilizations that preceded Greece and Rome were harmonious. And in our age of escalating violence, we might do well to consider human origins, study the whole story, and realize that the story may well be a spiral, not a straight line of progress, in which memory of the entire past is necessary before we can proceed. And I'll just tell you one vignette of this spiral theory. I'm reminded there was a procession of the Black Madonna in Trapani, Easter week, 1988, when the Sirocco was blowing up from the Sahara Desert to the Sicilian shore. And this beautiful Black Madonna, who looks extremely like Isis, Astarte, Aphrodite, and Venus, who were the very goddesses who were brought to that mountain above Trapani in Erasure. She's carried on Maundy Thursday by all the men and all the labor syndicates of the town. And they carry this beautiful Black Madonna in a gait of 3 steps backward before several steps forward. Women in black precede the Black Madonna, and women in black follow her. I had the feeling when I watched this that everybody along the route of the procession was assaulted by an ancient memory, because everybody along the route of the procession was in tears. And I guess ever since I've been trying to figure out where those tears have come from, because I was too. In any event, I just want to show you some pictures now, and then we'll talk about this. Where's that? Here it is. I hope I know what to do. Oh, here's something. The other way. Oh, this is the cover of my book. This is a Sybil from, she's called La Sibilla Libica. She's the Libyan Sybil. This is a maybe we should turn the lights on. A reconstructed skeleton of a figure found near goddess figures that I'll show you, which has been identified by archaeologists as a man of La Razza Nera. These are Grimaldi figures, which can be found all over Europe, which have been identified as African goddess figures. That was from an Italian museum. This is a goddess found before the Greeks at Megara Iblea, which is, I don't know if you know, Sicily, above Augusta. She's nurturing 2 infants. That's the difference you see with the pre-Christian woman divinity. Not just 1 child, but 2 and more. Diana has many children she's nurturing as well as animals. This is a goddess who seems to have hair in cornrows and has almond eyes. It seems to me it's Asian. Here's her front feature. This is in the southeastern part of Sicily. This is before the Greeks. These are from a museum in Avellino, Sicily. No, it's South Italy, near Naples. And these appear to be Egyptian. These are clearly Egyptian. There's an Isis and what appears to be Sekhmet. These are mother figures found in Capua in South Italy. Providence is unknown. I just want to indicate to you the astonishing number of goddess figures in Italy. I mean, this is an art Rinascimento. You found hundreds and hundreds. Here's that. Here's the familiar Isis. It's in an Italian museum. Here's a Sarke from the Middle East. Coincidentally, is remembered in the folklore. You know this in Italy. You know what this means? This refers to, when this is said to a man, this refers to him as a cuckold, which remembers that the early woman divinity had complete control of her sexuality. Oh, there's another picture of her. This is right outside where my father was born. I'm fascinated. These are symbols of the goddess. This is the Cretan goddess, who's found in the Italian museum. This is Isis in the Italian museum. This appears to be a starving. These are, I don't want to emphasize too much South Italy. The goddess civilizations are all over Italy. The Etruscan civilization was goddess-centered. And the Etruscan civilization is fascinating because the men and the women seem so contented. Because there wasn't a war between the sexes in the goddess civilization. This is what the Greeks did to the goddess. She was a gorgon. This is Diana of Ephesus. She's black. This is a figure that clearly shows the thesis of my book, that the pre-Christian woman divinity who's black is the precursor of Black Madonna. You'll see her at Naples. She's 7 foot tall. This is the goddess in the area around Messina. This is Ceres. You find her in a street corner in Rome. I wanted to show you these. These are the mosaics at Piazza Armerina. Because these were done by African craftsmen. And they're very similar to the figures in the Bordeaux Museum in North Africa. This is the Kouros figure, which is very often associated with the goddess. It's that son who became Jesus in Christianity. This is the oldest goddess, Black Madonna, I have found. She's at Seconto. I'm sorry you can't see her face because it's got the history of women in her face. But the church is so uncomfortable with her. They, first of all, put her in the basement, the original place. Second of all, they removed her for security reasons to another church where you have to hunt to find her. But there she is. Oh, very beautiful, 5th century. The Byzantine Madonnas are more acceptable to the church because that's, after all, another branch of Christianity. And at the church where the Sacromentissima is found, in the basement, they have her at the altar. This is okay. She's also dark, but she's associated not with paganism, but with another branch of Christianity. But you see, this is where she's located now, and you notice that John the 23rd is crowning her. John the 23rd is the only poet to whom people bring flowers to this day. The only one in 2,000 years. But he crowned the Black Madonna. And well, he's only associated with liberation theology. There he is. This one is a very interesting Black Madonna. She's found outside of Foggia, and it's the one that peasant communists come to pray. The week after Easter is when pilgrimages to Black Madonnas occur. They let the Christians have Easter, but the Monday after Easter, you have the pilgrimages to Black Madonnas, who's another thing. And peasant communists come to pray for her, pray at this shrine, which is outside of Foggia, and then they celebrate May 1st communist celebrations nearby at Cervignolo. Here she is. Got almost an Asian cast. This is the Black Madonna of Divinity, which is the holiest place in Sicily. And underneath it, there's a thing that says, "I am black and beautiful," from the Song of Songs. This This is a Black Madonna in North Italy. Unclear to me where at this point. This one's outside of Cutignano, and she's called La Greca. They call them on, see, she's a Byzantine Madonna, which is what historians call all Black Madonnas, but there were Black Madonnas before the Byzantine, so that thesis isn't quite true. This is one of the depictions of the story. See, the stories about Black Madonnas are fascinating. They're brought usually in a ship without sails, and are drawn in a cart without a driver. And the oxen know where to stop, and where the oxen stop is where they build a sanctuary to the Black Madonna. Now here you see she's been made very white. This is the Black Madonna gown with the gold thing. Oh, I went backwards. Oh, what am I doing? This is a you will come across Black Madonnas if you look here. I have your eyes open everywhere in Italy. This is a Graglia, a little nowhere place in northern Italy, Graglia. This one may be Seminara. I'm pretty sure it is. This is in the boot of Calabria, in very poor areas. There are two very important Black Madonnas. One is at Palmi and one is at Seminara, and they're considered miracle-working Madonnas. This is one of the Sibyls. You can't see her very clearly, but there she's got a book open. And she's preceding the Judeo-Christian program. I think it's Daniel here. Here's another one. Oh, well, here, that's a better picture of it. This is one of there are at least 8 Black Madonnas in Rome. This is one of them. There's many, many places in Rome. Usually they're enlightened, but they're considered Black Madonnas. This, I wanted to give you some notion what happens in pilgrimages to Black Madonnas. They're very festive. They always have candies with nuts, which are considered regenerative. And there's dancing and roistering. In fact, so much roistering the church has a connection with it. This is, I want to show you some Black Madonnas in France. I want to give you the impression that Black Madonnas are only in Italy. There are many, many more in France, for example. What is astonishing about Black Madonnas is that in Italy, right underneath the Pope, there's so many. But this is Sandra Colley, who's at Saint-Marie de la Mer in the south of France, and she is the Madonna to whom all the gypsies of Europe come on May 24th. It's magnificent. I'll show you pictures. She's a little diminutive figure, and they come to venerate her in a little niche in the basement of the church. They're so full of candles and so full of people that you want to faint, but you never saw so much concentrated or felt so much concentrated energy. Here she is being carried, because she's carried into the sea. This is part of that celebration. These are her 2 white half-sisters who are upstairs in the church and who have their festival the day after her festival, but it's a bland festival compared to hers. This is another Black Madonna. And another one, this is near Le Puy in France. The story of Black Madonnas of France is aches to be written. I hope somebody does it. This is another one. Another one. I wanted to give you some notion of what happens, you see, with that whole veneration of the pre-Christian woman divinity. It goes underground and becomes Black Madonnas, but it also becomes transmuted into the veneration of saints. This is a temple of Athena in Syracuse, which becomes the church of Santa Lucia. And here she is with her eyes. In the church story, she plucks out her eyes for her virginity, but the subterranean stories that witches celebrate her. Read my book, I'll tell you why. Here she is. See, she's got a sprig of wheat. Let's go back to the wheat, Earth Mother. She's sober. And they're celebrated like a festival. This is before, Mother was there just before her festival. Carl Bondro has a very revealing painting of her. The burial of Santa Lucia, in which two burly grave diggers are digging her grave while the church looks on. The art, can be regarded as very revealing. Here's Santa Teresa, whose story is fascinating. All right, now I want to give you some notion of how carnival evokes submerged beliefs. This is called La Luna Negra, the black moon. Carnival in Italy is accompanied by the most scurrilous political satire I have ever come across. For example, these are all politicians of Italy that you're called rompe palle, which means balls breakers. This is what they look like. And here are the poor angels of the West, using radiant stature. And here's the devil. And here's this is fascinating. This is the Palestinian struggle, David and Goliath, David and Goliath. And this is what major statesmen of Italy called toxic waste. This is a fascinating one because this float is of a feminist riding a faded motorcycle, and she has these 3 balloons which are blown up condoms. And on the condoms are the faces of the leaders of the Christian Democratic Party, the Communist Party, and the Pope, which is pretty interesting. And I just want to give you some notion, just any place you wander in Italy. We were going to Positano for a few days, which is that beautiful place up there. And we just happened to come across another Black Madonna. And I asked the priest about it. He said it was all legend. I didn't even know about it. And then he saw me come back and take more pictures. Then all of a sudden he produces a book that he written on it. They have to trust you for them. Here, the evidence you see of Christian civilizations all over Italy, these are truly, these are symbols similar to what you can find in the Cyclades. This is Giordano Bruno. I just want to give you the notion. I mean, the heresy is right underneath the top in Italy. Giordano Bruno was martyred in the 17th century because he said the world was animate. They killed him. And all of the different layers of the different civilizations of Italy. These are Christian churches of Palermo that look like Islamic mosques built by Muslim workmen. And this is a Bocca della Verità, which is very interesting because the Bocca della Verità, this is outside of a church with a Black Madonna, and that's why I'm interested in this. The Bocca della Verità became a symbol in the recent nonviolent decapitation of Christian democratic and opportunistic socialist leaders in Italy, in which this particular symbol was put in all the theaters of Italy by feminists, and people would come and put denunciations for corruption in the mouth of this mouth of truth. But to point out, I just want to this is associated with the Earth Goddess series, and in the Christian era with the Black Madonna. Well, that's enough for now. Maybe we could have the lights. I'm sure that question is you must have. Yeah.
One of my things is like, I've come across Black Madonnas and was listening with women. Why is fascism on the rise?
Where is fascism?
Right, and you would think that this would...
Well, in just a few days ago, the Fascist Party of Italy gave up being fascist, this racist, which my friend, who's at Laura Karate, just back and looks at that's bullshit. So, I mean, there's a whole spectacle at the top of a kind of, it's a kind of spectacle, really, which I think Italians enjoy, which has nothing to do with really what they believe or what's really going on. What's really going on in Italy is that there are base movements who have very interesting, whose themes are liberation theology, very, very left politically, They're very, very strong. Not only the women's movement, the student movement, the men's nonviolence movement. Extremely strong in Italy. So if you look at the top at that political spectacle, you have to understand what's happening.
Talked about in Europe, France having the Black Madonna.
Yeah.
You didn't give any other places that you
Oh, well, the most one you know a lot about is the Polish Black Madonna Chiavola.
So it went up also.
Yes, and they're once they're not, outside of Barcelona, magnificent one, and other places in Spain. In general, you can say everywhere the Roman legions went, which is pretty much everywhere in the world. Yeah.
Black Madonna, any of the Black Madonnas, is there instance of her coloring or whatever translating into her child? You know, that's what
Yeah.
I saw some of the pictures.
Well, her children, I mean, they don't children. When she's black, the baby's black. He's often not black, not a baby, but it's kind of an infant, it's kind of an adult baby. Yeah. Yeah. I noticed that in African American theology, there's a big emphasis, I think, about the black Jesus, but they don't talk so much about the black mom. But there's infinitely a whole conversion, I mean, after all this interest. Because it all substantiates each other. The thing that's fascinating to me, we don't know, all these sources said, we don't know what color people were after we stopped being chimpanzees. I don't know how come we don't know this, but we don't know this. But we do know that people were a lot darker than they are now because climatic change. We do know, for example, that in the 9th century, Scandinavians were the same color that Lebanese are today, which is pretty dark. Well, first of all, because all these sources said that skin color is the least. I mean, there are many differences among skin color is the least, but since racism is always fixed on skin color, I mean, all of us were a great deal darker. And we know ourselves that, you know, are we reading the book The Sweeter the Berry? It can be very rapid, the change, very rapid. That's why he said we're offloading sets and subsets of genes that can change very rapidly in very short spaces of evolutionary time. But it's not the skin color that we need to change. We need to change the violence into non-violence. Which is why this is not a wild kind of research. I'm very, very interested in how, you know, how do we become less violent? One of them, if we realize, I mean, the arch-conservatives have always said, well, we've always been nonviolent, but that's not true. That is not true. The human race has not always been violent, has it?
No.
There's a kind of a period that you can demark. It's a period between 4,000 to 6,000 BCE, where all of a sudden it became different. Anyway, I really recommend archaeology, genetics. Yeah. Tracy?
Yeah. I guess right. What does it mean universal non-politics? What does it mean for us today here in the United States? And maybe the correction I want to make is that you're saying that earlier you said something about ethnicity, you know, not really having any meaning in a way, because it's like all the races are so intermixed.
Yes.
Is,
But our histories are different.
Right.
We have to be very careful about that. The last thing in the world all of us have to do is co-opt somebody else's
I
history.
But what I haven't been using that is the notion of coalition building
Yeah.
among peoples, because I think
Oh, yes.
there's the whole thing of right now division, good life, bad life.
And also this is
and then that's how they keep us on fighting.
and as an academician, I mean, I'm fascinated because I'm also concerned. I'm a feminist historian, but also an ethnic historian, and I'm so taken with how inadequate it is, for example, me as an Italian American woman to study Italian American history and culture, because it's really Mediterranean culture. Then you know, no way you can understand Italian culture without understanding the African and the Middle Eastern. Because first of all, they would, I mean, perhaps we don't mingle as much as we used to, but I swear, in prehistory and early, there was an enormous amount, when it was hard to get around, they just walked. But an enormous amount of mingling, yeah.
Wasn't it Hannibal that conquered Italy? For how
I can't
many?
hear you.
Was it Hannibal that
Yes.
conquered Italy?
Yes.
For over 400 years? Is that right? Was it for over 400 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
He
now-
was a descendant of the Phoenicians, Carthaginian descendants, which makes his story fascinating. See that whole
You're talking about him
convert-
being an African, right?
Yeah, he was an African,
Right.
but he's also a descendant of the Phoenicians who came from the Middle East. That whole thing is so mixed.
I also, I think the six was origins of mankind, or evidence of the six origins, have all been found on African soil.
Yes.
So that's
But the
what I
most
understand.
evident, I mean, there are a few
Right.
other places, but the abundance of evidence.
Has been found,
Yeah.
and that is supposed to be where
Right.
mankind
Yes.
originated from. And there's been many of, well, anyway, now the pygmies is not a term that they call themselves.
No, they call
it's
yeah.
I forget the name that
Yeah.
they call, but it's not. That's a European
No,
name.
I know.
Pygmies. So it's what
There's
is it?
another term.
What Hottentots?
Hottentots.
I've forgotten, but I don't think it's that long. But it could be. I don't know. But I know that that's not the appropriate term.
It's not the African.
It's just like Egypt is not the appropriate term. It's Kemet. But that was, I really loved your presentation. Are you going to do it again? Because I came in so late. You have to park 10 miles.
I know.
And walk 20 to get here.
I know. What you have to do is read my books. This could be from the Cody's ASUC store, other places, the African store in say the big parking. I know, other places. And write the publisher that she come out and do that. It's a shame. It's going to come out in Italian edition, Remastered, and in German edition, it's Remastered. Yeah, thank you.
And she's launched our celebration of Black History Month. And we thought it was particularly fitting to have Dr. Birnbaum do that. Tomorrow begins that celebration. Of course, African American Studies is not confined in celebration to 1 month, but we do acknowledge that there will be other activities. Johnny, would you like to announce any other activities that are coming up?
The only one I can think of at the top of my head is in April, we will be bringing Professor Janita Smitherman, the author of Black Talk, which is a Black dictionary. And we hope to have it here in this room, and we look forward to having you guys come. It should be a real interesting lecture.
Very good.
Thank you for coming.
Thank all of you for coming. There are some refreshments
Yes,
in the back. We hope you'll enjoy yourselves and talk more with Dr. Birnbaum.
Anyway, thank you. And a piece of paper here.